Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place where the sea once rose, not just with the tide, but with fury. You're lying on a windswept coast now somewhere in western Greece. The sand beneath you is damp with the hush of retreating waves. The air is thick with salt and the metallic scent of old storms. Above, clouds churn in that strange bruised purple color the sky wears when something's wrong, like it's trying to remember an argument it never finished. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly up the rocky shore, barefoot each step, squelching in tide-soaked moss. The only sounds are the distant cry of gulls and the low grumble of thunder, pacing behind the horizon like a god that hasn't made up his mind. And maybe, just maybe he hasn't. This island, nameless on most modern maps, was once part of a thriving city. But don't strain your memory trying to recall it. Most people forget it ever existed. That's what happens when the sea takes something back completely. Poseidon wasn't one to leave leftovers. The locals, a few weather-worn fishermen with cracked voices and slower boats, call this place cursed. Not the flashy movie-style cursed with skeletons and fireballs, but the old kind. The kind that sits quiet in the roots of a land. They whisper its ancient name over ouzo and worry beads Heliki. You follow the coastline eyes, scanning for signs, old columns maybe, or broken tiles half swallowed by reeds. But all you see is water everywhere and a strange pattern of stones underfoot that seems too orderly for nature's hand. They say Heliki vanished in a single night. Just whoosh, gone. Swallowed whole like a mouthful of wine poured straight into the sea. No survivors, no temples, no songs. But that's not entirely true. There was at least one song that survived, a sea chanty really passed down through generations of boatmen. It tells of a city that danced too loud beneath the moon, ignoring the god whose temple stood at its heart. Now you're starting to feel it too, aren't you? That soft pulse beneath your feet, like the heartbeat of something ancient buried under wet stone. Or maybe just your imagination. Historians still argue whether Heliki was real or legend Atlantis' lesser-known, saltier cousin, but let's not rush. Tonight you'll walk every coral-cracked corner of this story. And maybe, just maybe, by the end you'll understand why Poseidon, god of waves, of quakes, of untamed horses, and salt spray temper tantrums, chose to drown an island he once adored. And let's be real, even gods have favorite places. And when they lose them, well, the ocean tends to take it out on everyone. You step over a tangle of driftwood as the waves recede again, exposing more of the shoreline flat stones, worn smooth-patterned like puzzle pieces that never quite fit together. A whisper of wind snakes past your ear, and you swear you catch the tail end of a name, Heliki. It lingers in the air like a forgotten lullaby. Not shouted, not announced, just breathed like the island's bones remember being called once. You make your way inland where the land buckles gently as though it tried to resist the sea's grasp all those centuries ago. The grass here grows in tufts, not carpets. Olive trees lean with their gnarled limbs raised toward the sky like old philosophers debating with clouds. And near the edge of a shallow lagoon you find them two fishermen's shirts faded to ghosts speaking over a battered net. You pretend to be busy admiring the view, but their voices carry. One day one mutters she'll rise again. She, the other, scoffs. That place was cursed from the start. She was beloved, the first replies, by mortals and by Poseidon himself. That's what made her dangerous. You look away quickly when they glance in your direction, but the conversation stays with you like sea salt, clinging to your lips. Heliki, a city lost so completely that only myth kept her name afloat. Now a quick fact check, because yes, some parts of this are more history than bedtime rumor. Around 373 BCE, ancient sources like Eratosthenes and Pausanias describe how Helike, a bustling Achaean city, was swallowed by the sea following a massive earthquake and tsunami. It was the capital of the Achaean League, famed for its bronze statue of you, guessed it, Poseidon. And here's the kicker. The statue reportedly stood underwater, visible for centuries after the disaster. Historians still argue whether this statue ever existed at all, or whether it was poetic exaggeration by sailors hoping to impress nervous landfolk. You sit now on a crumbled stone fingers, brushing the mossy edge. In your mind's eye, the city begins to take shape, not as ruins, but as it must have been bustling agora, bronze gates, temples with their white columns gleaming like bone in the sun. Merchants yelling over amphorae, priests making smoke offerings, children chasing goats between stalls. A life that felt at the time unshakable, immortal. And at the city's center, towering above all, the statue of Poseidon, with his trident raised not in threat but in command, not rage but rulership. You sigh. Gods and humans have always had a complicated relationship, haven't they? Poseidon wasn't like Apollo with his flutes and abs. He didn't whisper secrets like Hermes or scheme like Hera. No, Poseidon showed love the way the ocean does, overwhelming, indiscriminate, and prone to sudden mood swings. You wander a little further and come upon a patch of earth where no grass grows. It's shaped like a circle, perfectly flat, strangely warm, and somehow you know it's where the altar once stood, the one where the last offering was made. Funny thing, archaeologists have only recently begun to rediscover Helike's remains. The site was lost for millennia until the 1990s, when Greek scientists located ruins under both land and shallow water near the Gulf of Corinth. Turns out the sea didn't erase everything, it just held it in its mouth for a while. You crouch and place your palm on the warm earth, half expecting a heartbeat. And for a second, just a flicker, you do feel something, a memory, a voice. A hum too low for science, too loud for superstition. Maybe it's just the tide shifting, or maybe Heliki is still breathing down there. You continue inland, the ground sloping gently upward, offering a vantage point where land and sea clasp like reluctant lovers. The breeze stiffens, bringing the scent of brine and something older, like rusted bronze and volcanic ash. You feel it in your bones now, not just the place, but the presence. Poseidon. Let's be honest, he's not the most approachable of the Olympians. He doesn't sing ballads like Orpheus or leave cryptic riddles on mountain peaks. Poseidon is the kind of god who throws a tantrum and calls it a natural disaster. And no, you're not imagining that the ancient Greeks literally explained earthquakes as Poseidon stomping in fury. You squint toward the horizon where the sky churns a slow grey boil. The sea doesn't lap the shore here, it drags its nails across it. There's a sense that the water is watching, waiting. You pause by a shattered fountain, its once elegant basin now cradling a stubborn puddle. The marble is etched with dolphins, horses, and spirals, Poseidon's signature motifs. You recall how he wasn't just the sea god, he was also the tamer of horses and the shaker of the earth. Basically, the god of all things that won't do what they're told. Historians still argue whether the triad of sea horses and earthquakes was a natural evolution of worship in different regions, or if it reflects older pre-Olympian traditions stitched together by poetic mythologists trying to keep up with his resume. Either way, it made him a terrifying deity to upset. You climb a little higher and come upon a stone plinth toppled on its side. The carving is weather-worn but clear enough Poseidon with his trident flanked by waves that look suspiciously like screaming faces. Cute. You sit on the warm rock and try to imagine being one of his priests. Every prayer would be a gamble. Every ceremony an attempt to soothe an immortal with the emotional range of a malfunctioning geyser. Some days he blessed sailors with wind and fish. Other days he sent tsunamis because someone sneezed during the hymns. You chuckle softly. God of sea and spite, someone once called him. Probably a Corinthian. They never did get along. But here's a fun little fringe fact. Some ancient sources suggest Poseidon's moods were tied to celestial alignments. A few rogue astronomer priests even claimed that certain eclipses or planetary shifts were Poseidon's triggers. Wild maybe, but isn't it just like a god to blame Mercury retrograde? You run your fingers along the stone. The air around you feels heavier now, like it remembers fear. This hill, some say, was the last place people gathered before the sea came. They stood with torches and eyes wide, watching the tide glow blue under the moonlight rising higher than it had any right to. No one ran, not yet. They were too proud, too sure Poseidon wouldn't dare destroy his own shrine. And yet, you shiver, not from cold, but from something older, something wet and vengeful. Maybe Poseidon didn't destroy Heliki in anger. Maybe it was disappointment, the kind that comes when mortals stop listening, stop believing. Gods, like anyone else, hate being ignored. You rise slowly, brushing sand from your hands, and look once more to the sea. It's calmer now, almost still. But don't be fooled. Poseidon never forgets. You descend the hill, following a path half swallowed by vines and cracked like an old mosaic. Each step taps into some deeper rhythm below the crust. It's not just erosion, you tell yourself. It's not just geology. It's the bones of a city that dared the sea to stay still and lost. Down in the lowland basin where the wind drops away, you come upon the ruins of what might once have been the Agora, Heliki's public square. Or so you imagine. Broken columns form a loose rectangle, and shards of terracotta litter the ground like confetti from a party that ended badly. You crouch beside what must have been a well. It's dry now, just a stone throat to nowhere, lined with coins too green to be copper anymore. This was once the city that mocked the tides. Not openly, of course. No one painted "Come at me, bro" across the temple of Poseidon. But they grew too confident. They forgot how recently the earth had been nothing but chaos. They built close to the water-paved roads without asking the sea's permission and told tales of being blessed by the god of the waves as if he were some pleasant uncle who liked gifts and grape juice. In its heyday, Heliki was one of the richest cities in Achaea. Its location near vital sea routes made it a hub for trade, and its political influence stretched far beyond its modest size. Ambassadors from other city-states came to strike alliances. Priests came to interpret signs from Poseidon's temple. Tourists came to see the famed statue that reportedly stood taller than two men and glowed faintly at dusk. Historians still argue whether Heliki had an early form of democratic assembly or if it was ruled by merchant families who liked the idea of democracy, as long as they kept winning the votes. You pace through the ghost of the marketplace. You imagine stalls lined with spices, bolts of dyed linen amphorae sealed with wax. A child runs past in your mind, chased by a dog. A vendor sings out a price in drachmas. A priest in blue robes walks slowly through the crowd, eyes turned skyward, looking for signs Poseidon might not have sent. And then you hear it, laughter. You freeze, heart-knocking once, just once before your mind catches up. It's the wind, you tell yourself, but it isn't. It's memory, or something like it. Laughter from long ago, high-rising, echoing off marble walls that are no longer there. You stand in the center of the square, turning slowly, letting the city rebuild itself around you. That's the gift of ruins, isn't it? They don't stay silent, they whisper, if you're patient. And now the truth prickles at the back of your neck. The people of Heliki believed they were Poseidon's favorites. And maybe they were, but favorites can still be punished, especially when they stop acting like it. One old tale tells of a festival held the night before the drowning, a celebration of Poseidon's favor that turned into something a little excessive. Drunken races, mock prayers, musicians dressing up as gods, not exactly respectful. Think Mardi Gras meets divine pettiness. There's even one scrap of papyrus, a fringe theory, honestly suggesting that during this final festival, someone dared to impersonate Poseidon himself. Full-robe trident, booming voice and all. And here's the kicker, he sat on the statue's base and made a joke about raising taxes on fish. Poseidon, as it turns out, has very little patience for improv comedy. You smile despite yourself. Gods are just like us. Except when they get mad, they don't yell. They drown continents. You leave the square feet crunching on broken stone and glance back one last time. It looks quiet, almost peaceful. But that's what people said that night too, before the sky cracked. Before the sea walked in, you push deeper into the island's skeleton, following the ghostly rhythm of footsteps long gone. The ground flattens again as you approach what must have once been the city's heart, the temple district. Even in ruin, there's a certain order here. Columns lie where they fell, not scattered, but surrendered, as if they bowed down all at once. The moon hangs low now, veiled behind grey mist, and you can almost hear drums, deep, hollow, echoing across stone. The festival had begun here, the one that changed everything. You picture it, torches flickering against marble dancers with silver sashes, lyres being plucked in triple time. Citizens of Heliki in their finest chitons, some already tipsy, raising goblets in Poseidon's name. But the toasts grew rowdy, the music faster, and then someone no one remembers who shouted, "Let's wake him, wake a god." Brilliant. They stomped and clapped and banged bronze dishes until even the stars flinched. One man rode a painted horse through the square draped in seaweed, pretending to be the god himself. And when the priestess came forward barefoot, face pale, they laughed. She warned them, "You are too loud, you are too proud." They offered wine. She begged them to offer silence. They didn't. This scene lives on only in fragments, mosaics unearthed from collapsed porticos, verses scribbled in the margins of later epics, and the always untrustworthy accounts of rival cities. Historians still argue whether this final festival was real or an invention designed to explain divine punishment, but something about it rings true, doesn't it? Especially the statue. You find the spot where it once stood, an altar ringed with sea-smooth stones now half buried in sand. Poseidon arms spread trident angled like a lightning rod. But when it was found centuries later by divers, or so the story goes, its face was missing. Gone. Not eroded, not broken, just gone. As if it had turned away at the last moment. You kneel at the altar. The ground here is strange, loose but heavy. You dig for a moment and pull up a piece of carved shell. It's too symmetrical to be natural. A decoration, perhaps, or an offering. During that infamous festival, the citizens poured in their tributes: golden bulls, amphorae of rare oils, wreaths woven from imported roses. But Poseidon had stopped listening. Or worse, he had already made his decision. And then the ground began to shake. You freeze now, ears straining. It's just your imagination, right? But for a heartbeat, you feel it, a faint tremble, like a throat clearing beneath you. In ancient Greece, earthquakes were always attributed to Poseidon. His title, Enosigaios the Earthshaker, was a metaphor. People believed the land trembled when his trident struck, and that night it struck more than once. Accounts say it began just before dawn, a low hum, then a jolt, then another. Buildings cracked, birds screamed, statues leaned, but no one ran, not yet. The people of Heliki had grown used to tremors. They lived by the sea, yes, but they thought themselves untouchable. Their mistake wasn't arrogance, it was familiarity. You rise slowly, brushing your knees. In the distance, lightning flickers, painting the ruins in white for a split second. You half expect to see the statue whole again, glaring at you with hollow eyes. But there's only night, and the sound of waves starting to grow restless again. You turn back toward the cliffside where the tide first crept in on that cursed morning. You'll go there next, but not yet. First, let the silence linger. Let the echoes of that doomed celebration drift upward like incense. Poseidon wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. You make your way toward the edge of what was once the temple courtyard. The ground here is uneven, strewn with shattered stones, collapsed lintels, and fragments of wall that look almost purposefully broken, like something ancient grew tired of being worshipped and decided to throw itself down in a storm of its own making. Then you see it. A statue, or rather what's left of one. Only the torso remains upright, draped in sea-slicked moss and coral-coloured lichen. It's unmistakably Poseidon trident, broken shoulders squared, still radiating the impossible dignity of someone who never asked to be honoured and definitely didn't approve of being mocked. But the head is missing, not fallen, not buried, gone. The stone neck is too cleanly severed, like it was removed not by time or weather, but choice. You circle it slowly, eyes tracing the muscle-strained folds of the sculpted robe, the etching of wave patterns down one arm. Whoever carved this knew what they were doing. The artistry is masterful, each line a prayer, and yet there's something deeply uncomfortable about it, like being watched by something that no longer wants to be seen. There's a local legend told by the oldest fisherman in the region, the one who talks to seagulls more than people. He swears that on windless nights, if you sit near this statue and listen closely, you'll hear the missing head whispering from the sea floor. It doesn't curse. It doesn't scream. It just murmurs names, not names of the guilty, just names, as if keeping roll. You laugh softly to yourself, then stop, because for a second you think you heard your own name in the breeze. Archaeologists have tried to explain this statue's missing head. Erosion, looting. Theories range from ancient iconoclasm to bored 18th century tourists. But historians still argue whether this particular statue was ever completed in the first place, or whether it was always meant to be unfinished as a warning. You reach out and touch the cold marble.
It pulses faintly beneath your fingers, not literally, but somehow, like touching the lid of a deep well. You pull your hand away, heart thumping once. You pretend it's just the chill, but you know it's more. Here's a fun tidbit to distract you. Ancient sculptors sometimes left statues headless on purpose when dedicating them to gods. Not out of disrespect, but out of humility. A way of saying, we can't truly capture your face, so we won't even try. Sweet, right? Unless, of course, it was Poseidon. And unless, of course, someone did try, and he noticed. The surrounding ruins seem to tilt slightly, like they're leaning away from the statue. And honestly, you're ready to do the same. The air is thicker here, like it hasn't moved since the night of the drowning. You glance back once more before leaving. The headless god stands silent, his broken trident catching the moonlight in a jagged gleam.
And in the hush of salt and stone you feel the unspoken truth settle in your chest. He wasn't absent. He was watching. You leave the statue behind, weaving your way through the half-collapsed porticos and stone platforms until you find a winding path sloping down toward what once must have been the shoreline. The scent of the sea sharpens, cutting through the damp smell of lichen and crushed pine. The ground grows sandier here, and scattered among the weeds are glints of something unnatural bronze or maybe gold. Offerings, half buried, half forgotten, but unmistakable. You kneel beside a cluster of them, a corroded bracelet, the handle of a miniature trident, and a cracked amphora with faded paint. You brush sand from its side and make out a wave pattern curling upward into what might have been a horse or a sea serpent, depending on how long you've been squinting. These were left behind in desperation, weren't they? Not the confident tributes of a city in its prime. These were the panicked gifts of people who had suddenly remembered that their god was not tame, not grateful, not patient, and definitely not predictable. Heliki had made offerings to Poseidon for centuries, lavish ones. Historical records describe golden bulls thrown into the sea choirs, singing from sunrise to dusk, even salt-caked altars carved from imported stone. This city loved its god, or perhaps it feared him so completely that it decided to call that love. But then came the years of silence, no more signs, no answered prayers. The sea grew stranger, fish vanished, tides swelled and receded in rhythms no priest could predict. And still the Helikians tried. They brought more gold, lit more fires, sacrificed more animals, all while telling themselves that Poseidon was merely distracted. Historians still argue whether these years of silence were truly divine withdrawal or just environmental shifts. Some point to evidence of tectonic stress and sea level fluctuation, suggesting nature, not the divine, had begun rearranging her furniture. But here's the thing, if you're an ancient city built right on the waterline and the water starts acting funny, you don't quote geology textbooks, you pray harder. And when your prayers go unanswered, you panic louder. You stand now at the edge of a flattened platform that probably held one of the city's smaller shrines. Its altar is still there, just a waist-high stone block, blackened at the center from years of fire. It's chipped, weathered, and deeply, unmistakably sad. This was the altar of last resort. You can feel it, the final night. People pressed in, close torchlight flickering on their faces, priests murmuring over bowls of oil. A chorus of voices raised not in celebration, but pleading. Children crying, dogs barking nervously, and that priestess again, older now, stepping forward once more to say what no one wanted to hear. It is too late. They brought everything, coins, jewelry, statues, even rumor has it a child's toy boat painted blue and white with Poseidon's name scrawled across the sail, as if one pure offering might outweigh 1,000 empty ones. You lean on the altar now, fingers tracing the pitted surface. A gust of wind presses against your back, sharp with sea spray. The tide is coming in again, faster than before, and then just for a moment you hear something behind you, a hoof fall, just one, solid, rhythmic, then gone. You whip around heart-lurching, but there's no one, just the fading sound, like a memory kicking up dust. Fringe theories abound, of course. One particularly delightful account from a Roman traveller claims he saw a spectral horse galloping across the sea near Heliki's ruins, mane made of sea foam eyes like moonlight. He took it as a sign that Poseidon had left a guardian behind, or maybe just a reminder. Gods don't leave things unfinished. They leave warnings. You take one last look at the altar. Whatever was placed here, it wasn't enough. The earth was already groaning, the sea already rising. And Poseidon, well, he'd already decided the air shifts. It's subtle at first, a low vibration like someone plucking a string beneath your feet. The kind of sensation that makes you pause mid-step and ask, was that just me? But then it comes again, stronger. The earth hums. You stand completely still. Your breath caught between inhale and exhale as the ground beneath your sandals gives a gentle shudder. Not violent, not dangerous, just enough to remind you that this island was once the epicenter of something vast and angry. You're not alone in feeling it. Birds go silent. The leaves tremble on trees that shouldn't be moving. Even the waves hesitate, pulled taut, like they're holding their breath. Then it stops, not a fade or a slow retreat, just gone. You exhale slowly, right. Totally normal, just tectonic activity. Greece is a seismically active region after all. Scientists say the entire Peloponnesian coast sits on a fault line, part of the ongoing tension between the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. Ancient Greeks didn't know any of this, of course. They just knew that sometimes the world cracked open like an egg and cities disappeared overnight. You step off the altar platform and begin to make your way toward the cliffs. That's where it happened. The final breach, the moment when Poseidon, if he was indeed behind it, said enough. The path twists through jagged rocks and wild sea lavender, the wind keening louder as you near the edge. You reach the bluff and look down, and the view steals the breath from your chest. The cliff face plunges into a vast bowl of swirling water, its edges carved by centuries of waves gnawing at the land. And below, deep, too deep, for any light to penetrate, you think you see rooftops. No. It's probably just rock formations, tricks of the moonlight, or maybe not. Divers in the late 1990s found what they believed to be the remains of Heliki submerged offshore, pottery shards, foundations, and most curiously rows of rectangular stones arranged just like city blocks. Not proof exactly, but enough to raise eyebrows in archaeological circles. Historians still argue whether those ruins belong to Heliki or to some other settlement lost to the sea in a region littered with history. But to you, standing here now, it feels obvious. Heliki's bones are down there, and somewhere below them the god's patience snapped. You sit near the edge, wind pulling at your sleeves, and imagine that night. The quake would have struck just before sunrise when the torches were guttering, when the priests were preparing their final chants. The ground cracked first, the temple walls split, statues fell. Then came the roar. Not from the people from the sea, a wall of water dark as ink and taller than the temple roof, racing inland faster than any rider. There was no escape. People didn't scream. There wasn't time. Just a collective intake of breath that never got released. Some say the water glowed, that it pulsed blue and green with a strange bioluminescent light, like the sea wanted to be seen as it reclaimed its offering. Others say it was quiet, too quiet, that the wave moved with eerie grace like Poseidon was making a point you built too close. You asked too much. You forgot who I am. You lean forward now, palms flat against the cliff edge, and look again. The sea below is calm, but it shouldn't be. You don't hear the usual crash of surf against rock. You hear a distant murmur like the remnants of 1,000 voices layered atop each other, chanting, warning, pleading. You blink. Gone. Just the wind again. Just the waves. Nothing strange about that, right? But still you can't help but feel Poseidon didn't just drown the city. He sealed something away, something meant to be forgotten. And you, for better or worse, are listening. You rise, slowly brushing bits of gravel from your hands, and begin tracing the cliff's edge, careful not to slip on the wind-slicked stone. The sea below yawns wide and still, but you can't shake the feeling that it's holding its breath, waiting, not in fear, but in memory. The path narrows, then opens into a wide shelf of rock overlooking a horseshoe-shaped cove. Here the cliffs are lower. Here the water would have struck first. You sit on a flat outcropping and let your legs dangle over the edge eyes, following the arc of stone down to the surf. And as you imagine the waters rise, the helplessness, the final few seconds before the end, a single, impossible image presses itself into your mind alight. One lantern, still burning, just before the flood swallowed everything.
Maybe someone tried to run, maybe someone thought they could reason with the sea, but the water didn't stop. You picture the wave now roaring in like a myth, made flesh-salt foam and fury bundled into one liquid force. This wasn't rain runoff or a gentle tide surge. This was Poseidon's full attention crashing down at 40 miles per hour. A wall taller than buildings, a mass so dense it could tear olive trees from the roots and grind temples into powder. You think about the stories told later by those who lived nearby. Villagers who saw lights vanish in the distance. Sailors who felt the shockwave from miles away. A Roman chronicler even wrote that the sea walked inland like a giant. When it left, it took everything. Everything. No screams, no rescue, just absence. In modern terms, we'd call it a submarine earthquake, triggering a localized tsunami perhaps linked to the same fault system that birthed the Corinth Rift.
But try explaining that to a family watching their home vanish under black water while Poseidon's temple cracked open like a rotten fig. Historians still argue whether a second wave followed a kind of aftershock tsunami that arrived minutes later, finishing what the first had started. Some say that was when the statues fell. Others believe they'd already crumbled from the shaking. But you wonder, was there a moment, just a heartbeat, where everything paused, when the sea stopped just long enough for the people to see it, recognize it, and understand that it was no longer theirs, that it never was? You dig a pebble loose from the rock beside you and hold it up to the moonlight. It's smooth, pale, and strangely warm. Maybe it sat inside someone's garden. Maybe it was part of a wall. Or maybe it remembers. That's the odd thing about places like this. They don't just hold memory, they echo it. And tonight, you're the listener. You pocket the stone not out of greed, but reverence. A souvenir from a drowned world. You won't keep it. You'll return it before you leave. But for now, it belongs in your hand. Because in this moment, as the waves whisper against the rocks below, the silence finally begins to make sense. The sea wasn't loud that night. It was deliberate. Poseidon didn't rage. He chose. And that somehow is worse. You turn from the cliff's edge and begin walking inland again, following a barely there trail that winds through overgrown brush and sun-bleached remnants of ancient walls. The plants here are sparse, brittle herbs, pale grass, thistles that clutch at your ankles like they're trying to hold you back. You reach what must have once been the outer edge of Heliki. Beyond it, the land rolls toward a hill crowned with wild olive trees, their limbs gnarled and silver in the moonlight. You head toward them. Something about that hill feels intact.
As if it stood apart from the tragedy left untouched, not by accident, but by design. You reach the top, panting lightly, and turn to face the sea. From here you can see everything: the dark waters where the city vanished, the temple ruins crumbling near the cliffs, and faintly the barely visible outline of those strange flat stones under the waves. You sit down in the dirt beneath one of the olive trees and let yourself imagine how it must have looked the morning after. Silent. Utterly, maddeningly silent. No smoke from hearths, no cries for help, no footprints, just seawater and the absence of life. Some nearby fishermen, it said, were the first to see it. They sailed past the shore and found nothing. No docks, no walls, just a churn of water too deep and too calm. For centuries afterwards, sailors avoided this stretch of coast. And even when they crossed it, they'd throw offerings into the sea. Coins, fruit, tiny wooden figures. Not out of devotion, out of fear.
You don't ignore a god who's already proven he can erase a city before breakfast. You take a breath and close your eyes. The wind shifts again, and with it comes a new sound. Not wind, not waves. Hooves. A slow, rhythmic clatter across stone, faint but clear. You open your eyes. Nothing. But you know what you heard. Poseidon's connection to horses is one of the more curious pieces of mythology. According to myth, he created the first horse from sea foam and coral, a gift to Demeter during his ill-fated attempt to woo her. Because nothing says, "marry me," like aquatic livestock. From there, horses became sacred to him, symbols of power, wildness, and unbridled motion. Fringe scholars even speculate that early horse worship cults in Thessaly were absorbed into the Poseidon mythos, creating the image of him as not just sea god, but master of all stampeding things. It would explain the uncanny frequency with which horses appear in his temples, sometimes even buried beneath them. You rise and walk among the olive trees. The ground here is soft, almost spongy. And then your foot hits something. Not hard, just enough to make you stop. You kneel, brushing back the earth. There, half buried in dirt and vine, is a small carving. A horse, no larger than your palm. Worn smooth with age, its legs curled beneath it, as if it were lying down. You hold it up. There's a strange weight to it, as if it remembers being loved or sacrificed. They say a horse was seen swimming offshore the morning after the drowning, just one circling and circling the ruins as though waiting for someone who never emerged. No saddle, no rider, just grief looping through the surf. You gently place the carving back in the soil and cover it again. Some things aren't meant to be kept. The sea is quieter now. The tide has shifted, and from this height it no longer looks angry, just vast and tired. You lie back in the grass, eyes scanning the stars overhead, and think not about death, but about choices, about the kind a god makes when pride, love and fury blur into something unrecognizable. Poseidon didn't just destroy Heliki, he chose not to save it. You rise from beneath the olive tree, brushing dust from your palms and turning back toward the sea, now just a silver sheet stretched across the horizon. It's hard to believe that beneath those gentle ripples lies a whole city, its streets, its prayers, its forgotten names. And somewhere down there, if legends are to be trusted, a temple, not the one on land cracked open and headless, a different one, submerged, preserved. You begin descending the hill toward the water's edge, heart tugged forward by something quieter than curiosity and deeper than awe. You've heard the stories everyone has, really, that if the moon is high and the tide is low, you can still see the tops of its columns beneath the surface like white bones curled into the sea's belly. As you reach the shoreline, the sand darkens under your steps. Tidal pools glimmer with reflections that don't quite match the stars above. You peer over a rock ledge into a tide-washed basin, and for a moment you see it. Not just reflection, structure. There, half shrouded in waving seaweed, are the unmistakable lines of carved stone, a stair perhaps, or a pedestal, something made by hands long gone. Your heart skips. It's not much, but it's enough. Divers in the modern age have indeed uncovered something here, walls, artifacts, even a cobbled street still aligned with the stars. One team found remnants of what they believe was an open-air temple with channels carved for ceremonial seawater flows. Poseidon's design was clever, let the sea in, but on his terms. Historians still argue whether what lies offshore is Heliki proper or merely a satellite district built to honor the god. But between you and the moonlit tide, you already know the answer. Poseidon doesn't do suburbs. You crouch near the water's edge. It's cold, colder than it should be. You reach in half, expecting it to recoil, but it welcomes your hand, curling around your fingers like memory. The sea isn't punishing now, it's inviting. You slip off your sandals, step into the tide, and let it pull at your ankles. A few meters out, the water clears, and you see it more plainly, white stone, encrusted with barnacles, and time still standing. Columns, broken and beautiful. And at the center, a flat platform, likely once the base for Poseidon's underwater shrine. Imagine it, people gathering on the edge of land to pray to a god who preferred to be met in the sea. It wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. Poseidon wasn't the type to come to you. You came to him wading in, shivering, carrying your offerings in both hands. One sailor's tale claims that when he dived into the water on a dare, he saw eyes, not sculptures, eyes, watching, waiting. He never returned to this bay again, not because of fear, he said, but because he felt heard. And that's the part people forget about Poseidon. He may have drowned a city, but he listened first. For decades, centuries even, he watched their parades, endured their vanity, accepted their offerings with tight-lipped tolerance. But eventually every tide turns. You wade out a little farther. The water curls around your calves, now tugging gently like fingers slipping into a familiar grip. You won't go any farther tonight, you're not ready. But just standing here above the bones of Heliki, above a temple that refused to rise even after the sea calmed, it's enough. You bow your head just slightly, not a prayer, not quite, just acknowledgement. Because for all his tempers and tantrums, Poseidon was fair, not kind, not cruel, just inevitable. The kind of god who leaves reminders. And tonight, you found one. You step back from the tide, sandals in hand toes tingling with a memory of cold water and stone. The moon is higher now, casting a pale ribbon of silver across the bay. It no longer looks like a grave, it looks like a threshold. Between past and present, between reverence and regret. You follow the curve of the beach to the east, where the sand grows firmer, peppered with shell fragments and tiny glinting stones. A crab skitters sideways near your foot, unbothered by divine trauma. You admire its confidence. As you walk, a question arises: was Heliki Poseidon's only lost city? The answer, of course, is no. Poseidon had a type, you see, grand coastal cities that rose quickly, basked in trade and splendor, then slipped under the waves after one bad season or one god-sized mood swing. Heliki wasn't the first.
And she wouldn't be the last. Let's talk about Atlantis. Yeah, that one. The tale most famously comes from Plato, who described it as a naval superpower destroyed by earthquakes and floods because of its arrogance. Sound familiar? Circular harbours, golden temples, silver-clad walls, and then poof, gone, swallowed by the sea. Historians still argue whether Atlantis was real, purely allegorical, or a politically charged metaphor aimed at Athens' rivals. But in bedtime mythologies, Atlantis and Heliki often get paired, sister cities, lost to Poseidon's judgment, separated by time but linked by hubris. Some fringe scholars even suggest that Plato's story was Heliki twisted through second-hand stories and filtered through the lens of philosophy. After all, Plato wrote about Atlantis just a few decades after Heliki disappeared. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe he was warning his fellow Greeks not to laugh too loudly at the gods.
You wander farther until you come upon a shallow lagoon where reeds sway like sleepy dancers. Here, fishermen still toss nets, though never before, whispering a prayer to the sea. You approach one of their stone markers, a small pile of pebbles topped with a token. Today a dried olive branch and a scrap of blue cloth. They're humble, these modern offerings. No golden bulls, no bronze figurines, just small acts of caution, like a note left on a cranky roommate's pillow. Please don't flood my house, thanks. Poseidon's reach stretched far beyond Greece. The Romans worshipped him as Neptune. The Etruscans had Nethans. The Phoenicians offered to Yam. Across the ancient world, different faces, same god, lord of the deep, the storm, the uncontainable. And he loved islands, Delos born from sea foam and divine compromise. Thera shattered by a volcanic tantrum that left half the island gone. Even little Nisyros said to have formed when Poseidon hurled a mountain at a giant. Not metaphorically, literally. You sit now on a rock overlooking the lagoon, letting the stories soak into your bones. Poseidon didn't just build cities, he tested them, gave them beauty, then watched how they used it. Heliki rose because of him, but maybe she drowned because of us. You run your hand across the rock beside you and feel a strange smoothness. Someone long ago carved a spiral here. A wave, a whirlpool, maybe just boredom during a long fishing watch. But the symbol repeats across this coastline, swirls, circles, as if the people were always aware that things come back around, that what the sea gives it eventually reclaims. The lagoon falls behind you as you climb a dune, crusted with wind-blown grasses and sea-hewn driftwood, the kind that looks like it used to be something, maybe a cart, a mast, or a prayer pole, left too long in Poseidon's mood swings. From the top of the ridge, the entire coastline stretches before you. It's beautiful. It's quiet.
It's dangerous. You sit to rest. And you remember, not your memories, his. Poseidon, as the myths go, didn't handle rejection well, and his grudges Olympic level. Take the time he lost Athens to Athena, for instance. Oh, he offered a spring salty, naturally. She offered an olive tree. The people chose the tree, and Poseidon, he sulked for centuries. Historians still argue whether that contest was ever more than metaphor, but temples to both deities stand within a stone's throw of each other on the Acropolis, their proximity a permanent side-eye from one divine ego to another. That rejection soured something in him, or at least in the way mortals remembered him. From that point forward, Poseidon seemed less generous. He gave gifts, yes, but always with a hint of threat. He made islands appear calmed seas for desperate sailors, even gifted horses to a few favored kings. But every blessing came wrapped in conditions and a ticking clock.
You wonder if that's what happened here. If Heliki was given a gift, prosperity, protection, divine patronage, and forgot the second half of the deal, humility, you picture Poseidon not as a monster, not a tyrant, but as an old craftsman. He shaped the coastline, curled waves into safe harbors, softened the rage of storms when he was in the mood, and Heliki flourished under that shaping hand until it got greedy. There's one lesser-known legend you recall now, a quirky tidbit from a half-burned manuscript. A Helikian merchant once bragged that his city had grown so mighty it would survive even without the gods. His neighbors warned him. He laughed. That night his house was the first to vanish. Coincidence? Sure. But the gods have always had a thing for timing. You rise from the ridge and continue down the slope toward a grove of crooked trees that twist like dancers caught mid-spin. And suddenly there it is. The remains of a road, not much, a few parallel stones barely visible but unmistakably man-made. You kneel beside it, brushing away sand. The stones are worn smooth, but between them something glints. A coin, small copper, etched with what might be a wave crest. You pick it up. It's nothing a museum would fight over, but in your palm it hums with the weight of vanished footsteps. This road once led from the city center to the shore. Priests would walk this path barefoot and solemn to perform sea rites. Children would run ahead dropping ribbons and shells. Brides would walk it too, heading toward Poseidon's temple to pray for safe passage to new homes across the gulf. Now it leads nowhere. You stand again and follow it anyway, because every road, no matter how broken, still points to a destination, even if that destination is just the truth. Poseidon wasn't cruel for drowning Heliki. He was done waiting. You follow the ghost road until it vanishes beneath a shallow stream. The water here is so clear it doesn't look real, more like glass laid over stone. Small fish dart between pebbles. The current is gentle, humming to itself like it remembers the footsteps it used to cradle. You cross barefoot, shoes slung over one shoulder. Each step sends ripples across the surface, but they fade quickly as if the stream itself is reluctant to notice you. respectful silence, or ancient exhaustion? Hard to tell. As you reach the other side, the air thickens, not with heat, but with memory. This was a place of voices once, commerce, worship, argument, celebration, and arrogance. The Helikians believed Poseidon favored them above all others. After all, their city had stood for generations. Their ships had returned home laden with spice, ivory, bronze, and praise. Their fields never flooded. Their statues gleamed. They thought they were safe. You find yourself walking among what remains of their villas, stone outlines, collapsed stairwells, thresholds that open into wind. This neighborhood was wealthy once. You can feel it. The floor tiles you step on are faded, but still patterned, tiny sea creatures twisting in pale blue and gold. You pause by a wall that still holds a fresco, faint, chipped, sun-bleached, but there, just visible, is a depiction of Poseidon. Not the angry version, not the statue-stiff one. This Poseidon is smiling. He's holding out a hand to a merchant offering a trident, not as a weapon, but as a scepter, and the merchant is taking it, not bowing, just accepting. You step back. That might have been the moment it all began to fall. Poseidon's favor was never meant to be owned, and this fresco, frozen in pigment and pride, shows a city that mistook attention for approval. Maybe Poseidon gave Heliki his blessings to see what they'd do with them. Maybe he waited watching as they forgot who gave them the sea in the first place. Historians still argue whether Heliki's rise was due to geographic luck or political genius. It sat perfectly between trade routes, shielded by mountains and rich in both fish and farmland. But even the best-laid city plans can't stand up to a god's silence. You find a small shrine tucked into the corner of a ruined courtyard, surprisingly intact. A niche in the stone, now empty, but once home to a household idol. Probably a small figure of Poseidon, maybe even handcrafted. Beside it, an offering dish still rests, though what it once held has long since returned to the dust. You kneel there, and you wonder, what if the people had noticed the warnings, the missing fish, the strange tides, the tremors, the birds that stopped nesting? Would it have changed anything? Would Poseidon have stayed his hand? Or had he already made up his mind? There's a story one passed down among Heliki's scattered descendants, that the god gave them a chance, one last oracle, one final dream. But no one listened, and so the earth broke, the sea followed, and everything washed away. You rise and brush your hands off on your tunic. The wind picks up, dragging sea salt into the folds of your sleeves. Somewhere nearby, a bird calls out just once, then falls silent again. You glance at the fresco one last time before walking on. Poseidon smiled once, but only once. The ruins thin out behind you, swallowed by brush and silence, until the only structure left is the sea itself, endless, heaving, patient. You walk now on a narrow path carved along a bluff, the sea below you, murmuring like it's in mid-thought. The wind drapes across your shoulders like a shawl, woven from breath and salt. You round a bend and find something unexpected, a tree. Not just any tree, a single olive, tall and bone-pale, growing from the split of a half-buried column. Its roots cling stubbornly to the ruin, wrapping the stone like fingers, refusing to let go. At the base of the tree sits a marker, modern, weather-worn, a simple plaque embedded in rock, scrawled in Greek and English, to the boy who survived. You kneel, fingertips tracing the faint inscription. The wind hushes. There are many versions of the story. Some say it was a girl. Some say there was no survivor at all. But the oldest version, the one whispered by fishermen, not written by scholars, speaks of a child found clinging to an olive branch on a shattered rooftop, adrift in the wake of Heliki's destruction. An old woman, bent and silent, spotted him from the cliffs the morning after. She hauled him from the water with a net meant for sea bass. She named him Kairos, meaning Lord, though no one knows if that was her humor or her hope. The child never spoke of what he saw. He just grew slowly and quietly, never leaving the village nearby. Some said he heard the sea speak in his sleep. Others claimed his shadow never touched the water. And one tale, told only on stormy nights, involves the boy walking into the tide one evening and never returning. Not drowned, just gone. You sit beneath the tree and feel the breeze shift again. It's gentler here, like Poseidon himself is watching from a distance, letting this story live. Perhaps one mercy was allowed, just one. The myth of a lone survivor has always bothered historians. There's no solid evidence, no tomb, no official record, no name etched in clay tablets. But fringe theorists love it. They speculate endlessly. Was the child the god's own, a demigod, a messenger spared to spread the warning, or simply a reminder that not everything must be taken? You lean your head against the column and stare up at the olive's twisted limbs. A single leaf flutters loose and drifts into your lap. It's faded at the edges, but unmistakably alive. The olive tree, after all, was Athena's gift wisdom rooted in the earth, steady and enduring. That one grew here in Poseidon's drowned city is poetic, to say the least. Maybe this is how the gods apologize, not with words, but with symbols. A branch that refuses to die, a boy who floated, a whisper of survival among the roar of loss. You sit there for a while, letting the air grow cooler. Shadows lengthen across the rocks and the sea grows dark enough to hide what it holds. You rise, eventually leaf in hand. And as you walk away, the wind carries a single, impossible sound to your ears. A child's laughter. Just once. Then silence. You descend the bluff slowly, the path winding like a loose ribbon cast by time itself. Your fingers brush against the cliffside as you walk, grounding you, steadying you. Below the sea no longer murmurs, it whispers. Not urgently, not cruelly, just constantly, like it's always mid-conversation and you're only catching parts of it. At the bottom of the slope you find another anomaly, a ring of stones, perfectly circular, arranged too precisely to be coincidence. Moss has crept in between them, but you can still make out their edges, each one slightly different in shape but uniform in size. Someone built this, and someone meant for it to remain. You step inside the circle. The ground is soft here, loamy and damp. Reeds sway at the outer edge and frogs chirp from some hidden pool. In the center lies something metallic, just visible through a crust of earth. You kneel and dig carefully. Your fingers close around something cool and angular. You pull it free and find yourself holding a bronze bull, small enough to fit in your palm, oxidized nearly to green, but unmistakable in form. Head-lowered horns, curled inward legs, frozen mid-charge. You know this symbol. You've seen it etched on ancient altars, described in dusty scrolls, even mimicked in modern replicas at museum gift shops. Poseidon's bronze bulls. There's a wild fringe theory that the people of Heliki built a pair of automaton bulls crafted by artisans with gears and pulleys and mysterious bronze alloys designed to guard the city in times of spiritual crisis. The kind of myth that sounds ridiculous until you're holding one in your hand. Some say these bulls roam the city's boundaries at night, snorting steam hooves, sparking their eyes, glowing with divine fire. Others claim they stood motionless beside Poseidon's temple, activated only when the god himself gave the signal. Historians still argue whether these stories are metaphor, misinterpretation, or a garbled memory of imported war machines. But you're not so sure anymore. You turn the figurine in your hand, and for a moment the air within the circle shifts. It becomes heavier, charged, as if the god is watching again, curious, not hostile, waiting to see what you'll do. You place the bull back in the soil, not buried this time, just resting, offering it the choice to stay or rise again. The ancient Greeks had a peculiar relationship with their gods, not reverence from a distance, but something closer, a divine cohabitation. They didn't worship Poseidon so much as negotiate with him. Every ritual was a plea, every temple a contract, and Heliki, for all its wealth and splendor, seems to have forgotten that. You step out of the circle, pausing to glance back one last time. The reeds sway as before, the frogs chirp, but there's a new rhythm underneath it all, hooves, gears. Just your heart, you walk on. As you continue, you begin to imagine what it must have felt like living in a city under Poseidon's eye. You'd rise in the morning to the smell of brine, trade your wares on a harbour, humming with sails and shouts. Visit the shrine before dinner, leave a sliver of fish or a drop of oil. You joke about the sea's mood like it was a family member, a cranky uncle, a favourite teacher, a volatile landlord. And every now and then in your dreams you'd hear thunder, not from the sky, but from below, a reminder that your city stood on borrowed land. You crest a small rise, and there in the distance is the shoreline again, broad and silver and endless. The moonlight stretches across it like a road. And for the first time tonight you see it not as the end of something, but as the border of something vast and waiting. You reach the shoreline once more, the sea lapping at your feet with the same gentle rhythm it's had all night. And yet now it feels different. Not just water brushing against land, but memory. A long, slow exhale from a god who never forgets. You stand still watching the moonlight ripple over the waves and think about how far Heliki's echo travelled. Not just across the sea, but across time. It made its way to Rome. Yes, even the mighty Romans, those concrete-obsessed empire-building juggernauts, paused to study Heliki's fate. A number of Roman authors, including Aelian and Strabo, wrote about the city that sank in a night. They marvelled at the ruins visible beneath the water, even centuries later. And some of them wrote in tones that almost sounded nervous, because the Romans knew their cities were rising too quickly, too confidently, too close to the sea. Historians still argue whether the Roman writers exaggerated Heliki's destruction to warn their own citizens, or if they simply couldn't resist a good ghost story. Either way, Heliki lived on in their imagination, not just as a place, but as a lesson. You sit on a driftwood log, half buried in the sand, and close your eyes. The breeze moves past your face like the brush of a horse's mane. You smile. Of course, Poseidon would leave a sign now. He always had a flair for timing. There's a mosaic in Pompeii found almost perfectly intact after Vesuvius made its own point depicting dolphins leaping over a drowned temple. The detail is exquisite, columns tilted just so, waves foaming at their bases, and 5 dolphins caught mid-arc. Historians call it decorative. But local legend says it was inspired by Heliki. Some believe the dolphins were the last creatures to flee before the flood hit, that they circled the city's perimeter, chattering madly, trying to warn the humans. No one listened, of course, but the dolphins tried. You like that version, it's gentler. You watch the waves now, half hoping to see a sleek fin break the surface. You'd thank it. You don't even know why. There's something profoundly humbling about remembering that even in mythology, humans weren't the only ones who grieved. The animals did too. The sea didn't just swallow stone and stories, it took warmth, routine affection, the unseen threads of a living world. And somewhere beneath you now lies a mural carved into a wall showing a woman kneeling beside a dolphin. Her hands are raised, not in command, but in apology. You reach into your satchel and pull out a small object, a smooth pebble you picked up near the temple ruins. Without thinking, you walk to the edge of the surf and crouch. You hold the stone tight for a moment, pressing it to your chest. Then you whisper, "Thank you," and let it fall into the sea. The splash is small, barely a sound, but the ripples widen in perfect circles like Poseidon's signature scrawled invisibly across the water. You wait. Nothing happens. No thunder, no tremor, no spectral bulls rising from the foam, just waves and wind and the peace that comes after being heard. You walk along the shore until the sand gives way to scattered rock pools, tide-worn and mirror-like in the moonlight. You peer into one and see your reflection ripple, then realign, surrounded by fragments of sky. It's strange how quiet everything is now. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of quiet that feels intentional. A hush. You find yourself wondering, why do some stories survive? Why does Heliki, drowned and forgotten for centuries, still cling to the world's imagination? What is it about this place that refuses to fully disappear? You crouch near the largest of the tide pools and run your hand through the surface. Cool, silky, deeper than it looks, like a doorway. Perhaps it's because Heliki's fate touched something primal. Not just the fear of natural disaster, but the deeper fear that being beloved by the gods is not the same as being safe from them. Heliki was wealthy, pious, powerful. It honored Poseidon above all others, and yet it vanished. In some versions of the story, Heliki's leaders held meetings the very day of the earthquake. A council debating taxes, merchant routes, temple maintenance. Nothing dramatic, just routine decisions, ordinary governance, and outside beneath their sandals the earth was already cracking. Historians still argue whether the city's final hours were documented at all, or if what we now accept as history is simply the echo of oral traditions layered with a dash of tragic imagination. Either way, it feels true, doesn't it? You rise and walk a little farther, until you come to a spot marked by broken pottery shards arranged in a loose spiral. You pause. This wasn't random. You kneel and touch one of the pieces. It's painted faded blue over dull ceramic. A ship, just visible, sails full. Another shard shows a face wide-eyed and open-mouthed, not shouting, listening. You realize this might have been part of a votive, a dish, or amphora offered during the final rites, placed carefully, left intentionally. And now returned by the tide, you begin to rearrange the shards, not in any precise pattern, just placing them gently in a circle around the spiral's center. It's a quiet gesture, but it feels respectful. Because whatever else Heliki was, powerful, reckless, blessed, it was human. It was full of people who cooked, argued, married, prayed, worried about their children, hoped the storms would pass. And then one night, the god they loved reminded them hope is not the same as obedience. You sit back on your heels and glance at the sea again, still calm, still pretending to forget, but it never forgets. There's a phrase scratched into a tablet found miles from here, believed to reference the drowned city. The sea remembers what the land tries to bury. You think about that as you walk away, leaving your circle of shards behind. It's not a warning exactly, not a threat, just a truth. The sea remembers everything, every offering, every defiance, every name. And tonight, as the wind moves through the reeds and the water glows faintly with the shimmer of stars, it remembers Heliki. Not as a ruin, but as a story still being told. You walk until your legs ache, until the stones press their patterns into your soles, until the moon leans low over the sea, like it's listening too. The path narrows again, climbing gently into a pocket of pines shaped by wind and time. You follow it without question, as though some ancient map etched itself in your muscles while you weren't paying attention, and there, nestled in a clearing, stands an old fisherman's hut, small, weathered, slumped against itself like it's been exhaling for years. Smoke curls faintly from a crooked chimney. A lantern flickers inside, throwing soft gold light across the stone threshold. You approach, slowly, half expecting it to vanish like the rest of the city's ghosts. But it doesn't. A voice calls out, gravelly, amused. "You look like someone with too many questions." You blink. Inside, seated by the hearth, is a man who could have been carved from driftwood. His hair is sea silver, his coat patched in more places than you can count. But his eyes shine like polished shells. He gestures you in without rising. You step inside. The warmth is sudden, dense with cedar and salt. Nets hang from the ceiling. Bones of fish and stories litter every surface. The man doesn't offer his name, doesn't ask for yours. He simply says, "The city didn't drown all at once." You sit opposite him on a stool, older than your country. Most think it happened in a moment. He continues, hands working a knot in a net, like the gods flipped a coin. But the sea took its time. It warned them. Again and again, little things at first. Missing boats, foul catches, lights under the water. You nod. You've heard parts of this before, but never like this. They ignored it, he says. Or worse, they celebrated it. Said Poseidon was stirring. Said it meant he was near. Fools. He pauses to spit into the fire, and the flames crackle like applause. "Do you believe he meant to destroy them?" you ask softly. The man shrugs. Meant no. Poseidon doesn't mean? He reflects. Like the sea, you give him worship laced with arrogance. You'll see yourself come back at you bigger, darker, and fuller teeth. You let that sit in your bones. Outside, the wind shifts. A gust slaps the windows. The old man doesn't flinch. He leans forward, eyes narrowing. "You want to know what survived?" You nod. He reaches into a drawer and pulls out something wrapped in cloth. He lays it gently on the table, unfolding the fabric with care. Inside, a fragment of stained glass. Tiny, barely palm-sized, but glimmering even in the dim firelight. It shows a figure, blue-robed, barefoot, holding a trident. You reach out hesitantly and touch the edge. The glass is warm. "This was part of the dome above the sea shrine," he says. "Found it myself years ago. Tide spat it up after a storm. Like the god changed his mind about keeping it." "Why keep it?" you ask. He grins. "To remind me not to forget." You watch the light pass through the blue glass, casting ripples across the tabletop. Historians still argue whether any pieces of Heliki's temples survived intact, whether the stories of glowing fragments washing ashore are just sailors' nonsense. But here it is, right in front of you. You sit in silence for a long time. When you finally rise to leave, the man doesn't follow you, doesn't ask you to stay. Just waves one calloused hand and mutters, "Don't take anything you didn't bring, especially questions." You nod and step outside. The wind greets you like an old friend. The sea sighs beneath the moon. You look down at your hands, empty, but your heart is full of echoes. The path from the hut winds back toward the coast this time, gentler, as if even the island itself has grown tired of rising and falling. You move through it slowly, thoughts swirling with everything the old man said, and more than that, everything he didn't. He never named Poseidon directly, not once, just he or the god or the sea. As if even now, centuries later, in a land where temples have turned to dust and names have lost their power, speaking it aloud still draws attention. The wind carries the scent of brine and pine, mixed now with something unfamiliar. Metal ozone. You follow your feet without thinking, and soon you arrive at a narrow inlet choked with rocks. The tide pools here are deeper, darker. You lean over one and catch your reflection again, only this time it's not just you. Behind your shape, barely visible, something moves. You flinch, heart skipping, but the image is already gone. Just seaweed maybe, a trick of the moonlight, or maybe not. You've read about places like this, coastal sites, where locals refuse to fish, to bathe, even to anchor their boats. Places where compasses misbehave and dogs won't step. Dead water, they call it in old mariner slang, a place the sea has marked. You sit at the edge of a slick boulder and watch the tide roll in. And you think again about Poseidon's wrath, but also his silence. That's the part most myths leave out. The silence. After the destruction. After the drowned streets. After the prayers had stopped. Poseidon didn't offer explanation. No thunder, no voice from the waves, just stillness. The kind that settles over a wound after it's closed but not healed. You look out across the inlet and notice something strange. A row of stones just under the surface, aligned too evenly to be natural. Not a wall exactly, not a dock, but something. The water moves over it like breath over a buried memory. Divers have reported this too, submerged paths leading nowhere, stairs descending into darkness, doorways with no walls. They debate their origin, of course. Historians still argue whether these formations were part of Heliki proper or merely remnants of smaller coastal settlements lost in the same disaster. But the sea doesn't argue. It remembers. And it's patient. You find a small rock and toss it gently into the water. It lands with a plop, sending ripples out in widening rings. For a moment, the sound seems to echo back, not from the surface, but from beneath. A hollow thud, you freeze. Then, silence. Again, there's something uniquely unnerving about being this close to history that hasn't finished happening. Not just ruins, not just stories, but energy. Tension, a pause in a song that might start again at any moment. You close your eyes and imagine Heliki as it once was. Not in its splendor, but at the moment it ended. You picture a woman running sandals splashing through rising water, a merchant clutching scrolls to his chest, a child half asleep pulled from his bed, the temple bells ringing once then shattering, and above them all, the wave, not monstrous, but inevitable, a decision, and Poseidon, wherever he was, not shouting, not weeping, just done. You open your eyes. The inlet is calm again. The sea resumes its breathing. You stand legs unsteady, not from fear, but from awe. Not all gods scream. Some drown you with silence. The shoreline curves once more, leading you along a stretch of low cliffs broken by patches of grass and wild thyme. The stars have shifted overhead, their cold light gleaming on the restless water like flecks of crushed glass. The wind hums a low note through cracks in the rock, and the sea continues its whispering rhythm, wordless but far from empty. You stop at a rise where the land dips suddenly into a bowl-shaped hollow. At the center, a ruin, not grand, not a temple, just a house. Its walls, waist-high and softened by centuries, barely stand. But the shape is clear, a courtyard here, a threshold there, the remains of a hearth still blackened from its final fire. You step inside. There's no sign of who lived here. No name. No altar. Just one wall scratched with symbols, lines spiraling inward, interwoven with wave patterns. You recognize one glyph repeated 3 times, a trident nested in a spiral. You run your hand over it. It's not ceremonial, it's personal. This was a home. Someone lived here, cooked here, argued and wept here. They probably joked about the priests, laughed during storms, sang songs over fish stew, and they were swept away just like the rest. You sit in the center of the courtyard and look up at the sky. It's too quiet to be coincidence, too precise. You've felt this all night, that the silence is telling you something, and then it hits you. Maybe Poseidon didn't destroy Heliki in rage. Maybe he drowned it out of mercy. The city had changed. Prideful, yes, but also tired. The omens had stacked high. The rites had grown hollow. The connection between the people and their god had frayed into performance. And Poseidon, god of salt and storm, may have watched it all and thought better to end it cleanly. You're not the first to wonder this. Fringe philosophers have speculated for years, writing in the margins of legitimate histories, that the drowning wasn't punishment but release, a way of restoring balance between mortal and divine, a reset. Historians still argue whether this theory has any merit or is just a romantic rewrite of a natural disaster. But when you sit here surrounded by broken walls under a sky so painfully eternal, it makes sense. Sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes it's knowing when to let go. You think of the statue again, the one with no face, not destroyed, just absent, as if Poseidon couldn't bear to watch. And now here you are, sitting where a family once shared olives and gossip, tracing the carved spiral of their kitchen wall and wondering how many seconds they had when the earth split open. Maybe 5, maybe none. You rise and walk slowly toward the edge of the ruin. A vine catches your ankle. You look down. Twined through the roots is a small object, flat round, etched with an image worn smooth by time. You kneel and lift it. A pendant. A tiny silver disc on a crumbling leather cord. It shows a horse, mid-leap, hooves, outstretched mane swirling like surf. You hold it tightly, and suddenly you feel the sea again, not just around you, but inside you. A pressure behind the eyes, a flicker in the ears, the sense of something vast just beneath the surface of your thoughts. You breathe slowly and let it pass. Poseidon didn't choose Heliki because he hated it. He chose it because he remembered when it was worthy. And maybe letting it sink was his way of keeping it pure. Untouched by the rot of time, unspoiled by memory, preserved below. You leave the pendant where you found it nestled in the grass and step beyond the ruin. The sea waits, just as it always has. But now you see it for what it truly is, not a destroyer. A vault. The land begins to rise again, beneath your feet gradually, then steeply, as if the island is lifting you toward a final truth. Your legs ache, but the pull is stronger than your fatigue. The wind thickens here, carrying with it flecks of sea spray and something older like dust from a scroll long buried. You reach a ridge that overlooks the coast in full, the sea stretching like a black mirror. And on that horizon, the stars tremble faintly in their reflections. You sit on the edge of the ridge, knees tucked to your chest, and think about time. Not just time passing, but time returning. They say Heliki is rising, not the myth, the land. Modern seismologists have discovered that tectonic activity in the Gulf of Corinth is slowly pushing parts of the submerged ruins back toward the surface, inch by inch, year by year. The drowned city is re-emerging, not in a surge, but in a slow exhale. Historians still argue whether this emergence is a true resurfacing or simply new sediment shifts revealing old truths. But the possibility is tantalizing. Imagine it one day, a full column appears, then a stair, then perhaps the curve of a broken temple dome peeking from the tide. The sea is not a grave, it is a library. And Poseidon, its silent librarian, is letting some pages return to light. You watch the waves below crash against the rocks in patient rhythm. They are not angry, not now. They seem tired, even thoughtful, like they're still deciding whether to give the city back or swallow it deeper. You think of other cities lost to the sea, Pavlopetri, Baiae, Port Royal. Atlantis, of course, all of them once proud, all of them now stories, and perhaps all of them if you believe the patterns blessed or cursed by Poseidon's hand. You lie back on the rock, letting your spine settle into the earth, and stare at the stars. The Milky Way arches overhead, a whisper of fire across blackness, and as your eyes adjust, something catches your gaze. A flicker, just above the sea's edge. At first, you think it's a boat light, but it doesn't move. It pulses, gold, then blue, then gone. You sit up quickly, scan the water, nothing, but your skin is tingling. Some say Poseidon appears to those who watch long enough. Not in form, he rarely bothers with theatrical entrances, but in signs. A gust of wind at the wrong moment, a ripple across calm water, a light where there should be none. You look back toward the sea heart, hammering, but nothing stirs. Still something inside you knows he's listening. You close your eyes and think not of tragedy, but of preservation. Not of punishment, but of pause. Heliki wasn't erased. It was shelved. And now, centuries later, the world is being allowed to remember. Slowly, carefully. As if Poseidon is still deciding whether we've earned the story back. And in that silence you whisper a promise. Not out loud. Not for anyone else to hear. Just for him. We won't forget. You descend the ridge, slowly, your hand trailing along the stones still warm from the day's sun, though the night deepens. Each step feels heavier, not from fatigue, but from weight, the kind you carry when a god's breath has lingered too close to your thoughts for too long. At the base of the hill lies a narrow inlet choked with seaweed and driftwood, and there you see something unexpected. Lantern lights, flickering, real. You pause. 3 figures stand near the water's edge, gathered around a tide-washed boulder. They move slowly, methodically, not startled by your presence. Almost as though they expected you, you draw closer, quietly, and as you do, you realize they are not tourists, they are not archaeologists, they are local. One holds a bowl of salt, another arranges fish bones in a careful spiral. The third hums under her breath, an old melody, older than language, older than story. You stop a respectful distance away and watch. The ritual is simple: no fire, no incense, no blood, just sea offerings and silence. After a moment, the woman humming looks up and nods to you. Her eyes are pale, but they see everything. She gestures for you to step forward. You do. The man with the bowl tilts it toward you. An offering, he says. Voice soft but firm. You take a pinch of the sea salt and scatter it into the water. It dissolves instantly. The woman nods again. He watches, still. Then they gather their items slowly, reverently, and vanish down a path you hadn't noticed before. No words of farewell, no names exchanged, just the wind curling around your ears like a promise. You're left alone with the rock and the empty bowl. You sit beside it. The rituals may be different now, stripped of spectacle, reduced to essentials, but the intention remains. The people who live here have not forgotten. They still honor Poseidon, not out of fear, but recognition. That gods don't disappear just because their temples crumble. And Heliki, it's not lost, it's remembered. Maybe that's why the city keeps rising, because the story refuses to sink. You watch the tide swirl around the boulder. You think of all the offerings once laid at its base, coins, poems, songs, and desperate promises. And in this moment you understand something you hadn't until now. The people weren't abandoned, they were witnessed. Poseidon didn't act out of vengeance, not truly. He waited, he watched, and when the city's song became hollow, he took it into himself. Not as punishment, as preservation. A god's grief doesn't look like ours, it looks like water rising over rooftops. It sounds like silence. You stand and walk back up the shore. The lights are gone, the figures too, but the salt lingers on your fingertips. You taste it and smile. The shore winds back toward a stretch of low dunes where sea oats sway in a breeze that no longer bites. It's as if the island itself has exhaled finally after centuries of holding its breath. You walk without urgency, now the kind of pace reserved for those who've already arrived, but want one last look. The moon is high overhead, bright but not harsh, casting everything in silver and sleep. Your footsteps make no sound in the sand. You're no longer an intruder here. You're part of the story. And just ahead, near a pile of driftwood, you see it a small shrine. Weathered, humble, and utterly out of place. Made from piled stones, pieces of shipwreck, and bones polished by time. A single candle flickers in a hollowed-out conch shell. Its flame barely holds, but it holds. The shrine isn't marked by name. No plaque, no inscription, just one object placed at its base. A fish hook. Rusted, bent, ancient. You crouch beside it. And finally, you understand. This isn't a shrine to Poseidon the god. This is a shrine to Poseidon the neighbor, the one fishermen pray to when storms churn, the one who takes their boats and sometimes gives them back. This is the Poseidon of grudging grace of waves, held back just long enough, of warnings disguised as winds. This is the god of those who know better than to expect mercy but ask anyway. You leave nothing behind, not out of disrespect, but because the shrine doesn't want things, it wants memory, intention. So you sit there beside the candle and remember. You picture the city, not just its end, its beginning, the first stone placed, the first coin offered, the first night someone looked at the sea and whispered thanks. Historians still argue whether Heliki truly worshipped Poseidon, as their principal deity, or if his temple was one among many. But the stories left behind, even filtered through time and legend, make one thing clear. This city had a relationship with the sea, complicated,
Beautiful, tragic. You look out toward the dark waves and imagine that last night again, torches flickering, ground trembling, the wind turning strange, and one man, maybe a priest, maybe just someone who saw what others didn't, kneeling by this very shore. Not asking for rescue, just saying goodbye. Maybe he lit a candle too, maybe the sea let him. A few years ago, a diver found a fish hook like this one, just offshore, not rare, not valuable, but it was bent in the same way, pulled as if by something too large to be fished, too strong to be fought. And near it, fragments of carved wood believed to be from a child's toy boat. Poseidon doesn't take without leaving signs. You rise, stretch, and step away from the shrine. The candle flickers behind you, still steady. You don't look back. Not because you don't care, but because you do, and that's enough. The sea is quieter now. Not calm, but resolved. The kind of quiet that follows closure.
the kind that comes after someone finally says, "I remember you." The stars have begun to soften now, their sharp edges fading into the lavender wash of pre-dawn. The sky is no longer black but bruised with the light that comes before morning, the kind of light that doesn't announce itself, just slowly replaces the dark. You're walking inland again, not far, just to one final place. A hill that rises at the very edge of the island, half forgotten, marked only by an arch of olive trees, twisted in a circle like sentinels guarding the top. You follow the winding path beneath their branches, each step slower than the last. You don't want this to end. At the top, the earth opens into a wide clearing ringed with stones. Not a temple, not a monument, just open space, untouched, unnamed. And in the middle a pool, shallow, still, round as a mirror. You approach it, kneel, and look down. At first you see only yourself, face drawn salt, clinging to your cheeks, eyes wide, in that particular way that only comes from standing too long at the edge of myth. But then slowly the reflection changes. You see a city, a bright, gleaming city, columns rising from marble plazas, banners, fluttering crowds laughing. A boy chases a dog. A woman calls out from a market stall. A priest lights a lamp beneath the statue of a god whose face you still cannot see, Heliki as it was, alive, unbroken. And then it blinks out, not in destruction, in sleep. The image fades. The pool returns to stillness, because that's the truth, isn't it? Heliki wasn't destroyed. It was laid to rest. Its heartbeat folded into the sea. Its songs dissolved into salt. Its offerings kept safe in the deep beneath the reach of forgetting. And Poseidon. He didn't roar. He didn't gloat. He just closed the door, not locked, just closed. You sit by the pool and let the light grow slowly behind you. The birds begin to stir in the trees, the air warms. You breathe long and deep, as if it's the first time tonight your lungs remembered how. And then one last sound, a wave. One single wave rising and falling below the hill. Not large, not urgent, just a reminder, he's still here. He always will be. And the island he drowned, it remembers him too. You stand and walk down the hill, your feet sure, your steps light, because the story isn't gone. It's waiting. And now you carry it with you, always. Now let your body soften. You're back in your room now, the weight of your journey ebbing like a tide after a long storm. The sounds of waves and wind still linger in your bones, but they no longer press, they simply float. Drift. You breathe in slowly. Hold, let it go. Again. One more. The sea is far away now, but its memory wraps around you like a warm, heavy blanket. You feel the salt in your hair, the sand still clinging to your heels, and a gentle pulse in your chest like waves brushing against a calm shore. The gods are quiet now, the myths folded gently into their ancient beds. No more columns to explore, no more voices in the water, only you, here, still, safe. Let the last images settle the temple beneath the sea, the flicker of candlelight in the fisherman's hut, the olive branch cradled in storm-worn stone, and most of all, the silence. The peaceful kind, the kind that means everything is where it belongs. You did well tonight, traveler. Now let your breath grow longer, let your eyes drift closed, and let sleep steady and deep rise around you like a tide Poseidon has chosen not to stop. Good night, sleep well. The sea remembers for you. End of script. Sweet dreams.